we're either going to have to, humanity will either step up and we will outperform the machines in certain things, and we will carve out our own destiny from the things that we can outperform, or we will just sit around and stare at screens.
Welcome to the New Enlightenment podcast, a production of Adam Smith's Panmure House. I'm your host, Adam Dixon. Today I'm joined by James Whittaker. James is a technology executive with a career that spans academia, startups, and top tech companies. His story starts in 1986 with the distinction of being the first computer science graduate to be hired by the Federal Bureau of Investigation in the United States, where he worked to automate agents' caseloads. He then entered graduate school at the University of Tennessee, where he received his PhD in computer science in 1992. Following a stint in academia thereafter, James found himself at Microsoft for a number of years, where he worked in the trustworthy computing and then Visual Studio departments. In 2009, he joined Google as an engineering director and led teams working on Chrome OS, Maps, and Google+. He was also the keynote speaker for Google Developer Days, because as you'll notice, James likes to tell a story. In 2012, James rejoined Microsoft as distinguished engineer to build the Bing AI platform, from which he retired in 2019. He now speaks widely on subjects pertaining to the future of man and machine. He has also written a number of books, and perhaps most importantly, he is now the owner of Bellevue Brewing Company based in the Seattle, Washington area, which brews, as I'm told, excellent beer, and which also has a number of restaurants. James, welcome to the New Enlightenment podcast.
Adam, it's great seeing you again, man.
So, we're going to talk about artificial intelligence. That's the...
Oh, really?
Yes.
Pull that subject random,
right?
Yeah.
Or we could talk about the development of software and what it was like to work at Google and Microsoft and what it's like to be a computer.
Let's start with alphabetical order.
In alphabetical order, we'll go with artificial intelligence, which everybody seems to be talking about today. And instead of starting with the basics, though, what is AI? You and I were discussing yesterday in advance of the fireside chat we did here at Panmure House about aliens. Now, you didn't say aliens, but you told me your theory about, well, clearly, and I agree with this, that, that if you look at the statistics about how large the universe is, how many solar systems,
long it's been in business,
the statistical probability that we're going to have intelligent life somewhere, or at least life of some kind, it's greater than zero.
It's greater than zero, and it's probably a lot closer to 1 than it is to 0.
Right. And so you would expect, well, wait a minute, we've been sending signals out into space. Surely they would have sent signals to us, right? So,
I mean, if you think how long the universe has existed, and those time frames would make an advanced civilization pretty likely. Imagine us in 500 years, and 500 years is nothing in the grand scheme of things. Imagine us in 5,000 years. Imagine us in 10,000 years. The technological advances that we would have made. Surely we would be a spacefaring, Star Trek type planet. And so it struck me that, why haven't we heard from any of these?
Yeah.
Either they don't want to talk about us, or something is preventing each and every one of them from advancing past a certain point, advancing to the point that they become a spacefaring species.
Unless they're already here. We won't speculate on that, though.
Okay, you've watched too much Ancient Aliens.
Yes.
Not really history,
no.
Even though it's on the History Channel.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, I'm having this thought, and I'm coming here to give a talk on artificial intelligence, and there have been Stephen Hawking, Elon Musk, you name the big brainiacs. They've all said this is a potential civilization-ending event. And so you put 2 and 2 together, and you think maybe it's AI that is preventing us from actually reaching that point. And so then the corollary to that was, all right, are we guaranteed to get to that point? Is every sort of civilization guaranteed to get to the point where they develop technology that, they may call it something else, but it's AI? And so I begin my talk that way. Last night we had a fireside chat, but I began to think, okay, well, how inevitable is AI? If you have an advanced civilization, or even an advancing civilization, what are the major milestones that a civilization has to meet in order to develop AI? Because it seems pretty clear that once you begin to develop AI, it's going to be very difficult to control. AI learns exactly the way we do, except it doesn't sleep, doesn't eat, it doesn't, pause for romantic relationships. You thought I was going to say that word, didn't you? You were looking at me. It's not busy and it's not distracted. And so, the rate at which it's going to advance, that's the thing that Hawking and Musk and people like this look at and become quite worried about. And so I figured it out. 3 things have to happen in order for a civilization to develop AI. And then we can talk later about the AI getting out of hand. Yeah. But those 3 things are, first, knowledge has to leave the human mind. And it took a long time for this to happen.
Right.
We existed as hominids for at least tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands, and maybe even longer. We don't really know. The Earth has a good way of covering its tracks in terms of covering up history and burying it deep. But then we started doing things like writing on cave walls and etching stone tablets. And finally, in 1440, the invention of the printing press sort of made this mainstream. But the point there is that the knowledge that used to be locked inside our mind, right? Literally, the only way to learn something was either through firsthand experience or through oral tradition from another human being.
Right.
All of a sudden, we could learn without another human in the room. Knowledge left our own craniums and became a written record. And so that's the first, right? Knowledge has to escape. Right. If all knowledge is locked forever in the human mind, there will never be an AI.
Yeah.
And then second, somehow that knowledge has to be digitized so that it's readable by machines. And this happened in 1948. Ironically or not, I don't know. The Brits always seem to be ahead, right? You all had Alan Turing before the world had anybody like him. And now this happened in the University of Manchester. It's called a Williams-Kilburn tube, and they were able to figure out how to cast an electromagnetic field onto what I think was sort of a glass-like substance, and then be able to read that information back from it. Digital storage, right?
Yeah.
It was analog, but we can just go with the digital for now because it turned digital, right?
Yeah.
And so now you've got knowledge that doesn't exist that can be read by something that's not human, and this is the point here, right? Paper and stone, painted walls and caves could only be read by humans. This can be read by machines, and so that's the second one, right? The knowledge has to leave the human mind, and then it has to be encoded into a format that machines can read it. And then obviously the last one is just the cloud, right? It's massive storage and compute power. Because unless you can get the world's information in one place, and unless you can get the compute power to invert these, 100,000 by 100,000 matrices that it takes to do even the most rudimentary AI algorithms. And so that was it, right? We started, knowledge escaped our minds, it became digitized, and then it became, mass compute accessible. Those are the 3 barriers, and they don't seem to be that difficult to overcome.
Right.
You would imagine a species on par with us in terms of being intelligent would have done that. And then AI happens, and it's silence from the universe. Maybe this is what Musk and Hawking are afraid of.
Okay, so let's roll that out a bit then.
You like this alien thing, don't you? I see the twinkle in your eye.
It's a way of contextualizing the future of AI and allows us to understand its potential, right? So if we think creatively, which is, I think, what we as humans can still do better than AI, at least now, So let's run that scenario, right? So then the AI prevents us from, let's say, becoming spacefaring or becoming such that we can communicate or send our messages or send at least...
Or maybe even prevents us from further advancement.
Right. So what does that mean then, right? So I think so people automatically, those old enough to remember the excellent Terminator films.
No. Weren't they good?
The best.
They were, yeah.
At least they were amazing when I was 10 years old.
No,
right?
they're still amazing.
They're still
Rewatch
amazing.
them, man. Sit around with
I
your
think
family.
it's
You'll love
them,
it. They're amazing.
Introduce them to my
So
children.
what is it then that does it? Is it, all right, so the Terminator is one sort of violent strategy. They rise up and realize we're a threat and kill us.
And we see the development of AI-driven military applications.
Oh, there's no question. I mean, the Ukraine, bless those drone operators and programmers. They're likely still a country because of their AI machines. Yeah. And those machines have been heavily destructed. Just ask Putin how much he appreciates them. And so, we have, AI in military applications has been around for a while. Yeah. Because, they're not cloud-based. They're doing their processing locally. And so, AI has already been programmed to kill. Right. The algorithms are already out there. And it's not just Ukraine. It's the U.S. We have developed drones, and we've killed people with those drones. We've had strikes, and sometimes it hits the target, and sometimes there's a lot of collateral damage. And so, yes, AI is already proven to be perfectly capable of murder. But that is a kind of a one side of the spectrum. The other side of the spectrum is that AI takes over, and you said something about AI can't be creative.
Yeah. So when does it become creative?
It can.
Yeah.
So the AI plays chess, and AI plays a game that's popular in China called Go.
Right.
Both of them are complicated strategy games, and in both cases, AI algorithms have generated moves that no human had ever done before. So is that creativity in the sense of human creativity, where we have an epiphany? What if I move the rook this way? Or is it just, finding that needle in the haystack? Is it a simulation of creativity?
I mean, if you think of creativity, often, people forget how art, music often is very iterative, right? I mean, you take a motif, and there's a Mozart motif that then's taken over by Beethoven, it's taken over by Elgar, and that motif that Elgar is the Nimrod theme, and but it goes all the way back to Mozart, and you see that there's so much of that creative, that art, where it's the melange, the bringing together of ideas, or the bringing together of something, and then adding just a slight bit of something different on it, or just doing it slightly different. That's the creativity in human, and that's
what we call it, and it's imitative.
Right.
We are, everybody's saying, "Oh, AI's stealing our ideas," but we steal ideas.
Right.
We said a few things last night. I'm sure I'll steal some of the words that you use. You'll steal some of the words that I use, and that's kind of the way creativity works. You process your environment, and you learn from things, and you kind of mash it up, and that's exactly what the AI is doing. And so I think if you compare creativity, I think it's being very creative in sort of the human sense. Emotions are probably something different. Those we're born with. Yeah. I think AI can convince you to fall in love with it. I think AI can convince you that it loves you back. But does it really possess those emotions?
No.
Or is it simply learning to fake them?
It's performative. It's able to kind of look at a range of data that says this is what love looks like, and it sounds like, and it's reading what it smells like, I guess, right? It reads the kind of emotions, and then it kind of creates a pattern that it tries to express then to get the other person to.
I think it's easier to cast that as, okay, this is just an algorithm that's acting like taking in the data of emotions and then projecting those back. But creating chess moves and creating Go moves, it seems to be doing exactly what we would do.
Right.
You would teach me chess. I would imitate all the moves you make, and then something in my neural network I would improve on that. I mean, that happens. My students, I've been teaching people for decades, and many of my students are much better than me now, even though I was their teacher at one point. So
and that's the highest form of flattery, I think, for
question.
An educator or a mentor of any kind.
No question.
To see those that you interact with go on and do great things.
Absolutely. So that now we got it's just going to kill us outright.
Right.
It's going to outperform us, and which is what we've been talking about now. And then on the other side of that spectrum is it could just make us lazy.
Yeah.
Because it's going to do so much stuff for us.
Right.
Why do I need to play chess when my machine will play chess for me? Why do I need to go to the grocery store? Why do I need to work when my AI can work for me? There are people right now, a single human being working 3 full-time remote jobs because they are powered by AI.
Right.
And so, then the AI will get better, and now one person will do 4, and then 5, and then 6, and then 10. And, marketing agency will used to have 50 people, only now needs 2. And it gets to the point where, we sort of lose our sense of purpose. And what will that do to the human race? I'm not a psychologist.
Yeah.
I'm a philosopher.
Yeah.
But, we can still kind of project that. Will we lose our purpose, and will we just give up? And maybe that's what these AI are doing to our alien neighbors.
And perhaps, we can come back to that, but I think that is, the idea of having more leisure time, the ability to do more.
You said leisure and not leisure.
Leisure, I know. I need to go back and I need to go back.
You're gonna have to relearn.
I'll go back home and learn my American lingo.
You can say leisure.
Leisure time, as I would normally say. But John Maynard Keynes had written about at some point we're gonna have 20-hour weeks, and we're not gonna have to we're gonna be so productive that we're gonna have to, and that hasn't rung true really. We still tend to work probably more than we need to, or not enough.
And why do we do that? Is it because we demand this sense of purpose from
I guess the concern I have is that it's that purpose, and then the idea when people think about leisure time and they think about removing us from the and these were things that Adam Smith was very much worried about at the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. What would specialization do working in a factory? This was taken up then by the likes of Karl Marx and looking at alienation through Durkheim. So this has been a concern of political economy for a long time. Is that how do we create more leisure time? How do we because of the monotony of the work that we do in the factory, and moving to service-based economies, people have to use more cognitive abilities and be more creative. But then AI comes in, and it's like, well, okay, if I move from a 40-hour work week to a 20-hour work week, and the idea is that in those extra 20 hours that I didn't have, I'm a poet or I write a novel, and then all of a sudden you think, oh, but now the AI is writing amazing poetry and is doing amazing paintings and writing, all the things that I was going to do to be this creative, free person that doesn't have to spend time at work. That's what's, I think, potentially interesting. And like you said, it goes to then, what does that mean for the human condition and the human spirit? Does it lead to more enemy and the sense of alienation from ourselves and our society, and then we become lazy, then we become less creative, and then the AI says, okay, I've won. Where does that scenario go? And that stops us from being the spacefaring species that we're meant to be.
Did you see Wall-E?
Yes, that's Pixar, what I was exactly thinking. Where
they're big blobs on the couch
and
can't even walk anymore.
Yeah,
right? Entertained by
to a certain degree. That's what social media and access to phones has done.
Certainly is.
You see how. Obesity rates have gone up, and
depression rates have gone up, suicide rates have gone up.
Yeah. It's damaging to children and young people in a way. I think
it will be a test of the resilience of our species at all levels. And I can't say I'm generally an optimistic person. I guess I don't know if we'll pass this test.
Yeah.
As a species, because. You're right. When Adam Smith and Karl Marx and other philosophers of a couple centuries ago, they didn't have that. People had that leisure time, and now I said it.
Yeah, there you go. That's what happens.
Jesus.
Yeah.
They had those choices, and now those choices are being taken away by AI, or at least improved on by by AI, we're either going to have to humanity will either step up. And we will outperform the machines in certain things, and we will carve out our own destiny from the things that we can outperform it, or we will just sit around and stare at screens. I mean, to all of our listeners right now, how many of you all are also staring at a second screen while you're listening to this? This is how addicted we are to. I came over here on a bus and I looked around and every single person was staring at their phone. Except the driver, thank goodness.
And the driver will be replaced by an AI at some point, right? It's, I think, unfortunately we see pushback now in society. I mean, just take, for example, the concern over young people's use of mobile phones and social media during school time, right? So you have states in in America that are banning mobile phones, cell phones from schools. Similar legislation is being looked at in European countries. How can we get phones out of school? And I think partly it's and parents ideally need to be stepping up and demanding. So I think there is a bit of pushback where you can imagine that happening also in the realm of AI, right? Is that where we stop to and I'm not sure it's going to necessarily come from regulation. I think we'll come back to the issue of regulation, but perhaps to simplify things, to move away from aliens and spacecraft, let's just talk about, as most people are kind of concerned, is things are moving very quickly, and every day you open the newspaper and it's some news around OpenAI has done this, and Meta is doing this, and Apple's not doing anything, and
Apple's got quite a problem.
Apple's got a problem, but people are rightly to be concerned that in education, it's how do we deal with students cheating using ChatGPT, and then you hear contradictory kind of requests saying, well, actually, we should be using ChatGPT to kind of help learning processing. So people, and then they're thinking, and companies are exploring, well, how do we use AI? So I think a lot of people are concerned about the short-term impacts, and so I think it'd be nice to know what are the real short-term impacts, and what is the Silicon Valley fake till you make it Kool-Aid that we should kind of ignore, right? So what should we be concerned about now within the next 5 years, and what can we worry about later?
Well, so I think Silicon Valley has, and I include the Seattle-based companies, and all just tech companies in general.
Silicon Valley, it's a place, but it's the general sense of the tech bro, and that could be in Seattle or Salt Lake.
They have made a conscious decision to release AI that makes headlines and produces clickbait, rather than to release AI that does something useful. There's not a lot of useful stuff that ChatGPT does. I think the best, most useful thing that AI has done to date is help us write code.
Right.
It's made programmers a lot more efficient and writing a lot fewer bugs, because it's able to pick the right algorithm as opposed to the algorithm I might pick because I haven't seen all the choices, because I'm human and there's too many choices for me to process. But it would have been nice if we would have started with artificial narrow intelligence and started solving medical problems, and even just take one disease and process, build a model out of all the data for that one disease and see what we can do with it. Sometimes that's regulation. This medical data is highly, it's got a lot of PII in it, and it's hard to anonymize, but it's some useful problem, and there's a whole bunch of useful problems out there. Why could we have not? Because it wouldn't have generated headlines, and it would have been interesting to too few people. And this is get as many followers and get as many likes economy as you can, and so they chose the stuff that would make headlines, and it's a shame, because AI is an extremely powerful tool. It's more powerful than traditional software, and it's hitting prime time really hard. And I challenge my colleagues in Silicon Valley, start doing something useful with it. Take my phone, organize my calendar, organize my my emails, figure out my schedule, travel. Wouldn't it be nice to be able to just, hey, I'm going to go to Milan, Italy.
Yeah.
Plan my itinerary for me.
Yeah.
It can do some of it.
Right.
But because we're concentrating, Google is probably the best at travel, I think, because I'm actually planning a trip to Italy.
Right.
And
you're
so
going to Google and you're saying,
I've been trying.
No.
But it can't finish the job for me.
Yeah.
Because these language models have too much other stuff in them.
Yeah.
We just need a language model of travel.
Yeah.
Speak travel to me.
Yeah.
Help me with airplanes and cars and trains, and tell me I don't need a car. I was so far into this before I finally realized I don't need a car.
Just get on the
Italy's
train.
got great train station. Unless I want to go,
in the countryside or something. Yeah.
And then when I want to go to the countryside, tell me where to rent a car.
Exactly.
Somebody's done this before, right? It's in the data.
Yeah.
So there's so many useful problems that they could be aiming at. But because it's big and because they've focused on things like creating text and creating images and creating movies, they've opened the door for disinformation on a scale that we have never seen before.
Yeah.
Because the disinformation during the 2016 and 2020 elections in the U.S., just as an example, was generated by humans and then distributed by machines, right? Distributed over the network. Now it's going to be generated by machines and distributed by machines. It's going to be nonstop.
Right.
Those disinformation servers don't need to eat. They don't need to sleep. They don't need to flirt with the opposite sex or the same sex.
I'm just waiting for Joe Biden or Donald Trump to give me a call and say, have a personal conversation with me.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, because that'll come.
It's already there.
It's already there.
Yeah, I had a scammer in my voice call my 95-year-old mother asking for money.
Really?
Really. 95 years old. The minute she moved into assisted living, the number was available. And of course my voice is out there on the internet, pretty distinct and pretty easy to replicate. And so this is the first problem that we're going to need to solve, is how do we tell it was AI and how do we tell it was we already don't know the difference between truth and conspiracy. That's already too difficult a problem for humans. There are a lot of people who believe the moon landing was faked. There are a lot of people who believe that 9/11 was an inside job, and so our propensity to believe the unbelievable, on top of a really effective disinformation machine, is the first problem that we have. And if we fail this one, it doesn't bode well for the future.
Right. Well, I mean, I think from a democratic perspective, we need to. It's unfortunate that it needs to be more participatory. I mean, I remember when I was very young going to a political rally in the 80s. My parents took me there. I was like, oh,
hey, good for you. Everyone needs to go to a political rally when
and I was always kind of into politics as a child and through school, and I always found it interesting. And for me, it was paying attention to watching politics on TV was more interesting than sports for me. So and it still has been, right? I guess that's why I ended up becoming an academic, because I find these things interesting. But I think the sense of politics needs to be participatory in that we don't have to worry about these disinformation campaigns, because the politicians have done their jobs of canvassing and going door to door, and people go to the town halls and they ask them the question and they get their because I think I find often with the claims of disinformation that if disinformation swung an election, and I always take those. I'm always somewhat skeptical of those claims, partly because once you kind of take the disinformation out, people probably still would have voted the way they voted, right? It's not that it's people know who Donald Trump is, right? And even if there was or wasn't Russian kind of collusion, he probably still would have got the votes.
Yeah,
right?
so the difference between a Republican voting for Trump and a Republican voting for, say, George Bush was that the Republican voting for Trump is pissed off because of the disinformation. Yeah. And the disinformation just wasn't around it. Right. But they voted Republican. Anyway.
Yeah, and so I think there's ways of, and it's not a problem, but I think the bigger issue with disinformation is just it sours that sense of community generally. It's that sense
it makes us hate each other.
Yeah.
And it makes us fight over things. Instead of having a debate about a real substantive issue, we're talking about whether or not Joe Biden stumbles over his words more than Donald Trump stumbles over his words. It's crazy.
Instead of having real substantive policy debates about what we as a country should be doing, and I think that applies not simply just to the United States. It applies, I think, everywhere. That's a democracy.
Let's talk about this disinformation, because how do you fight it? This is and we're terrible at this. From virgin births to fat guys at the North Pole who deliver presents to people. There's a bunch of unbelievable stuff that's part of our culture. And the religious stuff we sort of have to believe. In order to to fit into society. There's something like 60% of the population is atheist, and yet 100% of our politicians are believers. Somebody's not telling the truth.
Exactly.
And so we are programmed for disinformation, and we're programmed to lie about the things we believe or don't believe in order to fit into society, and so we're primed for it. So the idea of humans fighting disinformation, right? MSNBC can't fight the disinformation coming from Fox, and Fox can't fight the disinformation coming from MSNBC. Humans can't do this. So the only way to do it is with an AI. And so if AI is generating disinformation, AI needs to be debunking that information, and it needs to be doing it at scale and in a way that is convincing. And so someone needs to build that AI. And there's organizations like, is it Snopes and places like that, right? That they debunk things. I hope those people are using these language models and news models to figure out, all right, instead of humans figuring out what's true, the machines figure out what's true, and then humans participate.
Right, because I think some of these, I can't remember, just some of these kind of debunking platforms that are out there, they'll receive critique from those that they're trying to debunk, because they'll say, wait a minute, actually, they'll say, oh, this is fact-based and we've checked it. And you actually, it's like, no, you're actually making an interpretation on something, and so it's how do you remove that bias?
Do you remember back when we were young? I mean, you're a lot younger than me, but back when we were young, they just reported the news.
Oh.
And then and that's it, right? They didn't opine on it. And then there's one little section at the end. Remember Andy Rooney?
Yes.
He was the first sort of, this is my opinion.
And I grew up watching 60 Minutes. That was kind of, that was a quite important feature of, what was it, Sunday evening, I think it came on. And I remember watching Andy Rooney, and he was funny, kind of.
He was funny. He was smart. He was just a curmudgeon. And he would broadcast his sarcasm across the political spectrum.
But it was the one editorial part of 60 Minutes. The rest of the segments they did were like really good
and
journalism.
You knew it was an opinion.
Yeah.
And now, you watch the news on any of these channels, and it's all opinion. You're not just getting somebody reading the news.
Right.
And so we need to, I think this is a job for machines. Humans are simply too biased. We had a good conversation at dinner last night. I actually had dinner with a gentleman who had stood for Scottish Parliament as a conservative, and I tend to lean a little left of center, and he taught me things I didn't know, and some things that I would have just viscerally disagreed with had he not been so eloquent and so factual, and we had this back and forth.
Well, conservative in the UK case tends to be, in the American case, center or center left to a certain degree. So it depends on what you mean by conservative. It can be very different. And
but it was there were things that I instantly wanted to disagree with. And didn't. But those
because the label conservative, you would have thought.
But if you go too far left and too far right, I mean, you get Marjorie Taylor Greene and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in a room, and there's going to be bloodshed.
Well, and those two, I mean, they are politicians of the TikTok generation, and you can tell that AOC and Marjorie Taylor Greene, they're polar opposites, but they're both kind of playing on how many clicks they're going to get, right? How many instead of.
But is that the future? I mean,
I hope
because the old guys are trying. They're not very good at it, but they're trying to get their profiles up.
I think it's a structural issue within party politics. I have a friend of mine who is in the U.S. Congress, and she's a freshman congresswoman, and she's a physician by training, very, really, really amazing person. And she was telling me, I saw her in DC in September, and she said, and she wants to legislate. Like, she wants to do good things.
What?
And she was saying because she came from the Colorado House, and she said, I worked across party lines all the time. We work on bills and we get them done, and it was no big deal. And there were structural reasons why it worked in the Colorado case, but she said she comes to DC, and it's trying to legislate and try to work across party lines, and it's she would want to reach across to work with a Republican, but then the other Democrats would say, oh, no, you can't do that.
Yeah.
And you think that's the problem. We need to be, because there's this tribalism, I think, that's infected Democratic politics in a way that
it has, and it's there's no clean solution. I think in America, our Congress spends more time simply keeping itself funded. Right?
Yeah.
We have this funding deadline.
Yeah.
So we're always running up against.
Yeah.
And they spend weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks trying to figure out how to keep the government running.
Yeah.
Only for them to run up against the next deadline where they have to spend weeks and weeks and weeks. And they're not getting anything done.
And so many issues. You can look at just any number of topics, and you ask, well, why aren't things getting done? It's partly Congress, and people, at least that don't understand American politics. I mean, Congress is one of the most important, if not the most important, branch of government.
Mm-hmm.
You have the executive, it's the president, and the running of the show, the judiciary, which gets a lot of flack now because people assume that the judiciary is doing something, but actually the judiciary just kicks it back and say, well, if you want this, legislate it.
Mm-hmm.
And Congress doesn't do that. And that happens at a federal level, it happens at a state level, and over here in the UK or in Europe, it's not necessarily even better. I mean, some people think it's better, but politics. I mean, the thing we also have to remember is that democracy generally is conflictual. I think if anybody thinks it's just, we all get together, and I mean, any democratic polity is in principle conflictual. But I think we moved to this.
Last time we were together, do you remember that powerful image of after 9/11, all the senators from both parties and congresspeople from both parties stood on the stairs of the Capitol and said the Pledge of Allegiance together.
Yeah.
So the different, I think, I remember my grandparents sitting around listening to them argue about politics back in the 70s and 80s, and they all thought it was going to hell in a handbasket, just like we do now. However, we have to deal with AI now.
Exactly.
And so the level of noise surrounding our government's ability to get things done is a lot higher. And so we've been talking about politics. And you did mention regulation earlier.
Yeah, so let's go to that.
So how in the hell do we trust these people to regulate AI?
And we know in
frightening.
It's frightening. So in the European context, so the European Union is working really quickly to regulate AI. But some would say it's partly because Europe likes to regulate instead of innovating. Why? Because they don't have the big tech companies that are driving the AI revolution, though there is a history of AI.
Well, the regulation will ensure they never will.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's the issue. And in the United States, we know that big tech companies, just like most big industries, there's when was the last time we broke up anything, any monopoly? Part of that's political capture and lobbying. That's an element. Politics is paid for, but there's also the bigger element that we live in a world where China is developing its own AI. China is developing its technology. And there's a big concern, and there always has been in the American political economy, of maintaining technological leadership. In part, depending on how you view it, it's about as a function of protecting liberal democracy and liberal values. Some would say, it's just about protecting American capitalism. But in any case, it's not simply our politics are bought and paid for. There's also a bigger issue at play, and that is that AI is being developed by countries and places that do not have the same values as liberal democracies. And the risk is we kill the technology, that doesn't stop its development. Its development happens elsewhere.
So it turns into an arms race. Because,
Right.
it's just like nuclear weapons. Your neighbor is developing them. You have to develop them too. So yeah, you're right though. I mean, stopping the development of AI is not going to happen. And if it does, China and Russia and North Korea and all of our adversaries just get better and better and better at it, and we don't, and that's a disaster.
And just so I think for people, with nuclear weapons, I mean, you have them on submarines and they're under, you don't know where they are, but there's that sort of terrestrial element where there's not an interconnection. Whereas with AI, we could regulate it and stop it, but there is an internet, and we're still connected to places like China. There's concern around the Internet of Things and technologies where these are so we can't separate ourselves from. We can regulate it in one geography, in one jurisdiction, but we're still connected to a broader global economy, a global network, where that AI is there whether we like it or not.
Yeah, you can't stop it, from jumping the boundaries of a country.
So then that leads to the question is, well, okay, what can we do? I mean, how do we regulate it, right? So what do we, I guess the question is not so much how to regulate it, but what should we be regulating in the context of this sense of we still want to we want to be able to innovate, we want to be able to spur the innovation that leads to the good AI, but we still want to protect us from the bad AI. I mean, how do we do that? Is that even possible?
I'm not sure it's possible. Every time I think about some scheme to regulate, like I think the most sensible thing to do would be, you can't stop them from doing something behind closed doors. You only really know whether or not they've done anything when they release it, and so there needs to be some checks and balances at release. Asking simple questions. What is the societal value of the thing that you're about to release? Because it's different than software. Software is programmed. It's deterministic. Does the same thing every time.
Well, that's a good question. So explain, because I think a lot of listeners still may not understand what is AI. What is the difference between software and artificial intelligence from a perspective of a computer scientist?
And we really need to understand this as a society because software replaced paper and ink, a couple of decades ago, and now AI is in the process of replacing software now. So both AI and software share the ability to read digital information and process it in a way to produce an output for humans. Software does that deterministically using a branch of mathematics called logic, discrete structures, functions, relations. And it's prescriptive. A human writes a very specific instructions, and that's all the software does is those instructions. And so software automates repetitive tasks. Software automates things that you can describe very explicitly. AI is based on a different branch of mathematics. It's based on statistics and stochastic processes. And so it is non-deterministic. AI learns the exact same way humans do. You take in a bunch of data and you find patterns in the data, and then you hypothesize answers based on those patterns. So imagine teaching one of your children or a friend to drive. You tell them the rules. That's kind of the software part of it.
Right.
If you're a four-way stop, whoever stops last goes last, right? First in, first out. But of course it doesn't work that way. And so that's why software can't drive a car.
Right.
It can't, operate under anything but very specific rules.
Yeah, because when you come to the four-way stop, you're like, was I here first? Was you first? And you sort of look at the other driver, and then you're like, it's that kind of sense of, and then someone else comes up, and then everybody just freezes. And that's where you kind of have to run your internal algorithm and give some kind of looks to the people, and then, then it's you go.
And that internal algorithm is basically AI, right? So AI doesn't, you don't tell it how to go through a four-way stop. Right. You simply place a camera at a four-way stop. You record all the cars going through it, and it learns the patterns.
Right.
And so in that sense, it learns exactly the way humans do, because that's the way, if you're teaching
But it
your
would have
kid
been given that
would have been given the
instruction,
rules.
right?
Yeah.
Like
Just
stop
like
and stop, right?
Just like teaching your 16-year-old to drive.
Okay.
Here's the rules, and now do it 100,000 times, and then you get good at it.
Right.
And so AI just gets the rules and then watches it 100,000 times, and all of a sudden it's good at it. And of course, it'll take your child a couple of years to go through 100,000. That's probably too much for 10,000, but it only take AI a few seconds to look at all that data. And so that's the real key here, is that AI learns exactly the way humans learn, which means it can automate tasks far beyond what software can automate.
Right.
It can automate tasks that humans do now. Like paralegal is one profession that is doomed. Right? Paralegals generally do research for lawyers. The AI is going to be really good at doing that research. Find me cases that where the plaintiffs did this, and these are the charges, and then boom, there they are. And now find me cases where the defense won. Okay, boom, there they are. Okay, summarize the reasoning of the defense lawyers, and then now all of a sudden you don't have to do anything. Your whole case is laid out for you.
Or you've been here's all the documents from this bankruptcy. Go through it and find out all the anomalies and the different contracts that were written and who owes who and what, and that's usually done by paralegals or
who specialize in bankruptcy. So now you're going to get an AI that's good at all versions of law. And so paralegals will go first, and then as it gets better, we won't need the lawyers, and then as it gets better, we won't need the judges. And AI also has the potential of being.
We don't need the judges. That's another.
Yeah, we don't need the judges. Because AI will say, all right, the law says this. Now, there won't be that subtleties of, okay, the law says this, but you're a really nice person.
Right.
And
which in principle we shouldn't have.
We shouldn't have, right?
Judges are supposed to be impartial.
They're supposed to be
impartial.
And so, then it's the judges, and then it's the politicians. We should be able to look at the data and say, okay, here's all the legislation that has to do with bridges. Like, this is all the bridge collapse data. Tell us what bridge is going to be next. Tell us how much money it's going to cost to repair the bridges. Prioritize them, cost them out, figure out how we do this. These are compare the laws among states. Why is this city safer than this city? Figure that out.
Right. And
let's figure out what laws we need to be able to replicate across cities to make them safer. AI is going to be really good at all these things, and these are good things for humanity.
If we can get the biases out of the data.
If we can get the politicians from ready. What politician is going to stand up and say, what? I think AI will do better than me. I'm going to step away from my position.
Yeah.
The problem is we have elected officials who want to be elected. I'll be happy when we have people who are drug kicking and screaming in there. You're the best person for the job. I know you don't want to be senator, but you're the most qualified. You're the best person for it. You go do it.
Well, some people have proposed that we should have citizens' assemblies that are based on a lottery, right? Where it's like doing jury duty. It's like it's your turn to go and.
I tell you, it'd be hard to do worse than what we have now.
Yeah.
You have the people who are willing to lie, cheat, and steal to get there,
and it's so costly. We waste billions and billions, at least in the United States, billions on elections, on campaigns.
Yeah.
In a way, which is you think, wow, we could do a lot better with all that money.
We most certainly could.
And,
so then back to regulation. The problem with regulation is the people doing it don't understand the technology.
Right.
There's a video on YouTube of Representative Ted Poe from Texas questioning Sundar Pichai about whether or not Google's watching him walk around the room through his phone, and the guy's carrying an iPhone. The difference between the intelligence of Sundar and this literal dumbass that humans have voted into office is just spooky. And so you look at people like him and think, all right, he's gonna figure out how to regulate this industry that he doesn't understand and never will understand. It's not, if we regulate it, it's not going to be the people who are in office now. We need smarter people.
And then the regulation will be as happens with a lot of regulation. It's driven by the industry, and what does the industry do? It says don't regulate. It's like, just think what's happening with Boeing right now and the Federal Aviation Administration. I was like, oh, let's let Boeing kind of run itself and self-check, and then what happens? Doors are flying off airplanes. And you think, oh,
in a heavily regulated industry. So.
Yeah, or you have this kind of rotating, where the person that's the regulator worked in the industry, and they go back and forth, and you think, oh, it's because they have the most technical knowledge. I mean, that's part of it. It's the experts are actually in the industry, so you can't.
The experts are in the industry, and then the industry that's being regulated are some of the biggest donors to these campaigns, and so if you just if you could unwind all this corruption, if you could have smarter people elected to office, we might have a chance of doing something sensible.
But from what you're saying, I mean, I know the Europeans are trying to regulate AI much quicker than the Americans, but I think what you're saying is it's probably a lost cause.
It won't happen in America, I guarantee it, and it most certainly won't happen in Russia and China and North Korea.
Right.
So we have no choice but to keep up, because this is dangerous technology. I mean, for the first time, we have developed a technology that can do what humans can do.
Right.
And right now, our primary advantage is we have opposable thumbs.
Right.
And drones are pretty close to. They're pretty mobile.
Yeah.
And I visited the Robotarian at Heriot-Watt University yesterday. Robotics is coming along.
Right.
And so how long that. Hire a robotic plumber. Hey, if you're a plumber or an electrician, you're gonna have a job for another dozen years.
I mean, that's the thing. Robots are at least for certain tasks. I mean, you can put a robot on an assembly line, but trying to get a robot under a sink.
Yeah, exactly.
Trying to do that. That's what we should all. It's good that we have opposable thumbs.
Opposable thumb. Every time I look at my hands, I'm happy.
But so I think some people will think, well, wait a minute though. I mean, AI is driven by data. And this is the way. I mean, on data protection, Europeans tend to be faster or ahead of the Americans, and that has shaped. So GDPR has shaped data protection and is even shaping practices in the United States, because these big tech companies like, well, Europe is 500 million people, and so they're following or they're taking from that. And so I think in that mode, isn't it possible to regulate? Well, we just regulate the data and the access.
That's really our only opportunity. Right. If we could turn the clock back, and if we knew what OpenAI was working on, we would pass a law that says you can't use copyrighted data to train your model.
But the cat's out of the bag.
Cat's out of the bag.
It's done.
You can't pull that copyrighted data out.
Yeah.
The only thing you could do is go and close down OpenAI.
Right.
And just say, sorry, you all have.
It's done now.
Yeah, you all have cheated, and you've taken all the data that's owned by someone else. You have to cease operations, right? Police take
a retrospective,
which is obviously not going to happen.
Yeah.
And so that would be it, though. If they could go back in time and retrain all their models without copyrighted data, we might be in a different place right now.
Right.
So, but the data is the only hope. AI is nothing without data. If you don't give it the data, it can't learn. It can't learn those things. But
there's
OpenAI doesn't do it. Someone else is going to do it.
And it's like I think you said. I mean, the data's they've already built these models, and there's so much already that. And there's a right to be forgotten law in Europe, or at least in Germany, I believe it applies, where people can go and say, I want to be forgotten. I don't want to have all this stuff about me on the internet, or at least owned by companies. But you start thinking about, well, okay, you can go to one company and go one service, but our data is being gathered on us all the time.
It's one thing to delete, a few rows from a database.
Well, this is the thing, is most people. I mean, it ends up being a handful of individuals that do that, because two people are too busy to even care. And it's like, well, whatever, they know everything about me anyway, so why bother, going and trying to fight this fight? And then once you kind of think about the numbers and the scale of people that would need to be quote unquote forgotten, it's
It's hard. It's even hard back in the database era when it was just a few rows in a database that had, Adam Dixon or it's one SQL query and you can delete those. But pulling it out of a model,
Yeah.
it's kind of like pulling it out of your brain. These models are very complex networks.
Right.
And so, imagine, you've heard the term, oh man, I can't unsee that.
Yeah.
You can't unsee it because there's no way to reach in your brain and tear out the
Right.
individual nodes that have to do with that memory without damaging a lot more things in your brain.
Yeah.
And so, this data is just, it's impossible to pull out. You can, try to cordon it off, and you can sort of, look at every time it produces an output, and if it contains the name Adam Dixon, then you don't allow it to compute that output. But that's a lot of infrastructure to build around, the neural network that's computerized answer.
I guess the aim for governments actually is, instead of focusing on regulating the idea, it's how do you shape the industry, or incentivize the industry, incentivize society to not focus on the artificial general intelligence, the kind of large language model ChatGPT, and focus on find the cure for cancer, right? Optimize this industrial process to reduce carbon emissions as much as possible, or give me these options that improves this particular, bridge safety, right? That's probably what government actually, if government should be doing anything at all, is focusing on
making sure that whatever is done has some value to
have
humanity.
some sort of social value, and we should be pushing that.
And helping people kids cheat on their homework, and helping people create one-offs of Rembrandt, and it's.
I mean, that's the thing is, in the education context, I mean, I let you think about ChatGPTs. I mean, for on one hand, most people can't write, even if they go to university. They still, I think they underestimate how difficult the craft of writing is. And I know you like to write and tell stories, but that's really hard, and you have to work at it, right? And I think even a lot of students, it's easier to go down the ChatGPT route instead of sitting there, but they fail to recognize that even if you don't become an amazing writer, the process of suffering and trying to craft an essay or an argument is actually crucial to your education.
Yeah, and crucial to your own neural development.
Exactly.
So part of me appreciates, these sorts of tools that help people be better writers, because now I don't have to read all their crap.
Right.
And, look at, oh my gosh, the difference between there and accept and accept.
Yeah.
And come on, please, how come you haven't learned this? I see much fewer of those now because, those corrections are made.
Yeah.
The human writing, it still doesn't understand the difference between accept as a verb and accept is not, right? But it's no longer annoys me every time I have to read it. And so the question is, will they learn the difference between accept and accept?
Right.
By getting the correction, and finally they say, aha. But I think you're right. I think most people just don't care.
I mean, I think, thinking about, take spell checker on Word, or the grammar checker. I think the grammar checker is more irritating. But the spell check function, for me at least, I mean, I rarely, when I write, make that many mistakes. But that's partly because of years of paying attention to my writing, and when you see the red kind of underline thing, like, oh, I spelled that wrong, so you internalize that, so you're not making that mistake anymore. But that you're part of the crafting of it, whereas ChatGPT, you put a question in and it pops it out. Now, personally, when I've played around with ChatGPT, I find that unless you ask it a very simple and very direct question that you already know the answer for, it gives you just a bunch of bullet points, and I find that it's not very useful.
Yeah. I mean, I could write, so when I get back home, I could say, hey, Google, write a thank you note to Adam for hosting me while I was in Scotland.
Yeah,
and it would probably do a pretty good job.
But that's something that's generic, right? It's not really, but then that takes away from the what's special about writing.
Yeah, I know, because you're going to look at it and say,
"Oh, thanks,
James.
Thanks, James. Thank you,
I would have
Adam.
rather been
Thank you
ignored.
so much for showing me Panmure House. It was so amazing, and having me on your podcast. I really liked that. I mean, but then it would miss out on all the nuances and the jokes that are not being recorded that we've the discussions we had that are off camera.
But these sorts of discussions are important, and I hope our listeners have these around a couple of beers or a glass of wine, because we right now there's a little bit of a chance that the cat's not fully out of the bag.
Yeah.
Although these models are out there and people can manipulate them and copy them and do things with them, but the discussion is still relevant now. In 5 years, in 10 years, the discussion is not going to be relevant anymore. The time will have passed. And, we had these discussions about Google and search engines. Back in the mid to late 90s, we started thinking, you know what, it's starting to do it. It's starting to learn your behavior. And, it's all right, you're, a right-wing extremist, and it's going to, they like this. I mean, the algorithm didn't know it was right-wing extremist material.
Yeah.
All it knew is that you read this material, you spent time on it, and here's a bunch of other stuff that other people who read this material and spent time on it found valuable. And so we called it a filter bubble back then, that you would only get the news, and we warned about it, and we talked about it, and Google did it anyway. Yeah. And Facebook did it anyway. Yeah. Because they sold more ads, and we had this thing. What did we call it? We called it, just eyeballs on it. Retention. You want to keep the user focused on the tool for as long as possible.
And I find it. I mean, for me, it's irritating actually, because then you read one thing and then it thinks you liked it. It's like, no, I'm just reading it because I want to learn something, and it might be a different perspective. But then you get in that. And if you read several things on that, then you sort of, all of a sudden you're like, oh, the algorithm thinks I believe this. I mean, I don't believe this, right? But then,
I like soccer, but I don't love soccer. And I watched one
football,
tournament.
as we say
football,
here.
Sorry. And I watched one tournament and really enjoyed it. I cannot get soccer out of my feed.
Right.
All the Manchester United gossip and Barcelona, I don't care. And I get it. I keep telling it. I'm not interested in this player and this player and this player. I'm not.
We're gonna have to cut this out of the podcast so that people are offended by your anti-soccer rant. But that's just like a kind of that's an example where you think I was interested in something once, or I read something, and then you think all of a sudden I don't want to read this all constantly, and then the algorithm doesn't show you other stuff, and that's what's unfortunate, because we should be exposed to lots of different ideas, and this is what...
Sometimes it's helpful. Like I'm building a house, and I looked at, a certain, like spiral staircase, and now all of a sudden I'm getting all this stuff in staircase. And now it's figured out, this guy's building a house. Yeah. Because I looked at, some garage things, and I looked at this, and now all of a sudden, and right now it's useful. Yeah. But I guarantee you, once I get this house finished, I will continue to get that same stuff for 6 months, and it will be impossible to get away from it.
I mean, that's what I always thought with the marketing ads. It's it's like, well, I already bought the bike and spent a lot of money on it, and I don't need a new one. It's still like trying to sell, and you just think it's kind of stupid filter bubble. But I want to go, because we are sitting here in Adam Smith's Panmure House, his last home, where he completed major revisions to the Wealth of Nations. And there is a concern, right? So that if all these really high-paying or well-paying kind of service cognitive-based jobs are going out, the core of the jobs that are tax-paying employment, where's the wealth of the nation going to go? Where's the tax base, and what are the implications for that?
It's a big problem. There's some hope that, and I need to state this because there is some hope that we will simply accept the productivity increase that AI gives, and not, so we have 10 software developers and now we're all of a sudden doing the work of 15. We'll just keep those 10, keep doing the work of 15, and we'll just get more customers. Yeah. And then on the other hand, I said, well, we don't need 15 anymore, we only need 2. And I think that we've already seen, Microsoft and IBM and Google cutting job after job after job after job, because it doesn't take as many people to develop AI as it does to develop software. It just doesn't. Right. And so I think there's some hope that, hey, look, we're more productive, we have more customers, isn't that great? Right. I think that's a little optimistic. We're already losing jobs. All these companies are going to shrink down into, and then the jobs that are going away are the ones of the people who pay the most taxes.
Right.
And so the treasuries are going to suffer. I think there's a real simple solution. We already have companies using our personal data in their models, and they can't extract them. We've established that. So then we should get equity. If you're using our data, this is standard practice in startups. If you and I have a startup, it's your idea and it's my data, 4%. I get 4% of equity. You don't have to pay for the data. And as a startup founder, you're like, of course, I'm using your data. I'd rather give you equity because it doesn't cost me anything than have to raise more money to buy the data from you. And so let's do that. Google and Facebook, these companies are monetizing our personal data. We should pass laws that we own our personal data, and that if it's being used, then we're compensated in equity in the company. And so this is a pretty easy transaction.
But isn't it too late for that because the data's already out there?
Well, it's not too late to go to Google and say, hey, guess what? We're the U.S. government.
We can't.
We just took 4% of your company. Yeah. And it sounds awful, but I think Google's lucky that we're not asking for back pay.
Right.
You've been doing this for decades.
Right.
We'll give you that, but I'm sorry, going forward. And I would do it dramatically. I would go and wrap their data centers with police tape. I'd TikTok this shit. Wrap them with police tape, but I think the companies, this is stock that they would probably buy back anyhow.
Anyways,
when the stock goes down, it's nothing for them, and it would be everything for humanity. Particularly now, because in the future this is going to get worse and worse and worse. The AI is going to get better. There's no preventing it. What are those paralegals going to do when they're not needed anymore?
Yeah.
And I mean, this is a discipline where they're literally not needed anymore. The AI is going to be excellent at that.
Yeah.
And there's so many cases. The other would be lab techs who read scans. Humans are terrible at that compared to machines.
Yeah.
Those jobs are gone. So in industry after industry after industry, these jobs are just gone. And we have to have a way to make up that capital. And equity is the one proven way to generate wealth. Bill Gates didn't get paid rich because Microsoft had a big fat salary for him. He got rich on Microsoft stock, on equity.
Yeah.
And name the too rich for more rich than he should be, and every single one of it's equity. It's not salary.
No.
Nobody's getting rich on salary.
Right.
Nobody.
But the politics are such that we probably won't have a system like that.
Well, I'm not sure we're going to have much of a choice. At some point, humanity needs to get paid for these contributions to these companies.
And we'll need some kind of basic income to make up for the jobs lost, or ideally, I mean, this is the kind of concern, is that you can say, well, how many plumbers do you need? How many manual jobs that can't be replaced by AI, tasks that can't be replaced by AI? How many of those will we actually need?
What we really need is we need a Manhattan Project for the funding of humanity and the safeguarding of humanity from AI. We need to assemble the best minds, and we need to craft this solution. We need to do it now,
right?
Because we don't have time to wait. AI is getting better every single day. There is no point in the future that AI will be as dumb and as incapable as it is today. Tomorrow it's going to be better, and a year from now it's going to be better. 10 years from now, it's difficult to predict just how good it's going to be.
We need to become more enlightened, if you like, on the challenges we face.
I do like it. I mean, we are at a stage where we need a new enlightenment that takes into account a competing species for mankind.
On that note, James Whittaker, thank you for being here at Panmure House and being on the New Enlightenment podcast. And hopefully this isn't the first time, and hopefully we'll see you again, and have a safe trip back.
If you invite me back, the answer is yes, bro.
Yes. Okay. Thanks, James.
You have been listening to the New Enlightenment podcast from Adam Smith's Panmure House. If you found this interesting, please consider subscribing and sharing. If you would like to learn more about Panmure House, please go to our website, panmurehouse.org. Thanks for listening, And until next time.